Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel conversation. We are going to be exploring today how do we improve formal education systems and drive greater social mobility. It is my absolute pleasure to have a star-studded cast with us today who are going to be looking at this conversation. But just before we do, we want to say that this is going to be an interactive conversation. There is going to be an opportunity for everyone who is currently on the stream to have their say, and we're really interested in what you have to say, and we'll do that in a moment. But just before then, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview to the conversation. Once we've done that, I'll hand over to the speakers to give us a little bit of an intro into their thoughts and what they think about the subject matter at hand. But I thought I'd start by saying this. I'm often told that education is the progressive revelation of our ignorance. And if you subscribe to the idea that humans are born with potential and nurtured to reach it, then education becomes incredibly important. It's the mechanism that you can use to ultimately change a person's life. My parents came to the UK from West Africa, and like many other parents, came with really big ambitions. And central part of that, their ambitions or their aspirations, were having children that were going to thrive here in the UK. For them, thriving started with education. They didn't sacrifice everything that they sacrificed for me to come over and, in their words, mess about. As far as were concerned, they came over here and I was part of that mission that they had. And the mission was as follows: top grades at your school, and then bachelor's degree, and then master's degree, and then PhD. I didn't ever quite get around to the PhD, and let's not kind of remind them too much because that's going to create some issues. But I think you get the general idea. Generally speaking, I the idea their idea of education is quite similar to how many firms see education. There's this idea about meritocracy, competition. We hire the best because we want to be better than our competition, and we operate in complex global industries where we require you to be nothing but the best. Now, the question becomes, what does it mean to be the best? What happens to everyone else who is not the best? And how do you know that an education system has done everything that it can do to make sure that people are the best that they can be? And if we dig a little bit deeper, what is the impact of some of these elitist ideologies on our young people? Is it the case that pressure makes diamonds, or is it the case that pressure just leads to poor mental health? Who is responsible for providing the support to young people from the most challenging of backgrounds? I remember so many people growing up in my school days who just didn't think that school was for them. They didn't relate to what they were learning. They didn't really feel inspired, talk less of aspiring to be the best. Today, when I speak to talented professionals who are excelling within whichever industry they may be in, I ask them what are the keys to their success. Was it university? Is there some other key? And frequently, people come back to me and they speak about the importance of social capital, having the ability to share a set of shared values that allows individuals to work in a group effectively and achieve a common purpose. In other instances, people speak about emotional intelligence, potentially having the ability to understand, to use, and to utilize your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, or empathize with others. Ultimately, all of this brings us to the central question which we are here to explore today, which is how do we improve formal education systems and drive greater social mobility? And to that end, it is my real pleasure to introduce the guests that we have who are going to be leading us in this conversation today. I'm going to quickly introduce them by name, and I'm going to open up for each of them to give us their very, very quick opening remarks. And again, just as an overview, we will be starting with Gary Uzunwa, who is the founder and host of Climbing the Rungs, which aims to inspire those from less privileged backgrounds to create career success and raise awareness of issues linked to social economic background. For his efforts in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, he was recognized by the Ethnic Minority Future Leader group within the Financial Times. That's going to be followed by Chris McInnes, MBA. He is a secondary school teacher with both public and private experience. Chris is currently at the University of Oxford pursuing a master's in learning and teaching, as well as the chair of his local governing board and the vice chair of a special school education consortium. This will then be followed by Andrew Fairbairn, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Sponsors of Educational Opportunity London, one of the most incredible organizations who are responsible for the development of many, many talented professionals from diverse cultural backgrounds, ensuring that they have the ability to gain career success and really inspire many. And finally, we also come to Precious Igalo, who is a psychologist working with adult reoffenders with personality difficulties within the NHS, but more lovingly, she's also an executive at YDWC. So, with such a star-studded panel, you ask me the question, why are you still talking, Horatio? And I ask myself the same thing. And so I'm going to pause talking and I'm going to hand over to our first guest, Gary, to give us his opening remarks on the question at hand. Gary, the floor is yours.
Sure, thanks, Horatio. And I feel like it's a bit of pressure now, star-studded panel. Just so I'm understanding correctly, Horatio, this is the 5 to 7 minutes that I have to complete my case, right? Sure, great. So the question being, how do we improve formal education systems and drive social mobility? So I'll give a short answer, and my answer, a short one and a long one. My short answer would be to provide more international experiences, or in other words, outward mobility opportunities to be less advantaged. And I'll go into, that's kind of my short answer. I'll give a longer answer within the 7 minutes on that. So a bit of background to myself. I started my career at LinkedIn. I worked there for 3.5 years on their graduate program, really enjoyed it, lots of fun, but was missing more impact, let's say direct impact in my life. In my role, so then moved to, let's say, one of the largest international organizations, international charities that the UK has. And at the moment, I lead programs for a campaign that is committed to social mobility. What we do is we provide low-income students and recent graduates with funded work opportunities overseas. So it kind of ties in with my short answer of international experiences. We focus primarily on Asia, China specifically. And what we found is that a lot of our alumni, when they come back from a 2-month work experience, just 2 months, 2-month work experience in China, in a foreign country, different language, completely different culture, food and everything, they come back, soft skills through the roof, confidence, emotional intelligence, adaptability, all those different soft skills which translate into the workplace have been significantly heightened by a short immersion or international experience in China. And if you're not going to take our kind of the impact from our alumni, you can take a research from UUKI, which is Universities UK International. They have found that students that are outwardly mobile, that travel to different countries during their education, are 9% more likely to gain a 2-1 or a first. They're 24% less likely to be unemployed, and they're 5% or 9% more likely to have a graduate job 6 months after graduation. So there's a clear consequence of having an international experience during education on your outcomes. Whilst recognizing that disadvantaged students or less privileged students and students from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds are the least likely group to participate in these. Why? We can discuss later on. But they're the least likely group to participate in international experiences, but they are the most to gain. So disadvantaged students or less privileged students who take international experiences earn 6.1% more than their peers who don't. Black students who are outwardly mobile, who travel during their studies, are 41% more likely to not be unemployed than their peers that don't. So there's a massive opportunity here to improve social mobility through encouraging more outward mobility. And that's what I would like to see be involved or put into the education system. Just to give a bit of a personal anecdote to highlight the value of this. So I did an internship in banking in the end of my second year of university, and that taught me 2 things. I didn't want to work in finance, for sure not. And I didn't want to work straight after university. So when I went to my final year, I focused on international experiences. Consequently, I did a gap year. So I did 1 year of traveling post my education. It was an amazing experience in tying into emotional intelligence and how this experience helped develop that for me. There was a plethora of experiences where, what was the perspective or norm in my head was challenged. And that helped me be more open-minded. To give you an example, I traveled to South Korea for a few weeks with my friends who were South Korean. And I remember one of my friends, let's say he told me he was 27 years old, but he passed me his passport at one point, and from the age on his passport, he was actually 26. So I asked him, you told me you're 27, but your passport says you're 26. Like, what's going on? And what he then told me is that in Korea, you have two ages. You have your international age, which is what we would determine is our age, as the day you're born. But you also have a Korean age, because in Korea, they count the 9 months that you were in your mother's womb as 1 year of existence. So they say they're 1 year older. And at first I was like, well, that's just strange. Why would you want to age yourself? And that doesn't make sense. We don't understand age in that sense. And then I took a step back and realized, well, South Korea is one of the most developed countries, developed economies in the world, that's home to some of the biggest companies in the world, be it LG, Samsung, Lotte Corporation. They have universal education. So it's not to say that they think differently to us, that they think wrong, right? And that kind of broadening of mindset and kind of opening my mind has allowed me to become a lot more emotionally intelligent. When I'm at, and translates into the workplace, when I'm at work and someone has a difference in opinion to me, I don't meet that with resistance. I meet that with curiosity and interest. And that really does stem from having that international experience when I was younger. And to kind of go back to the question of, how do I think we could improve the formal education system? If I could wave a magic wand and kind of have my own wish, I would love to see every student from a low socioeconomic background to have been or have participated in at least a 2-week international experience by the time they are 16, by the time they've left school. Because again, for all those different reasons, as we've said, the outcomes on employment and earnings, there's a significant consequence of engaging in the outside world, the world outside of the UK. And for those who aren't aware, or may aware, the Erasmus is no longer available. So Erasmus was the UK's, or was the EU's kind of international educational exchange program. That is no longer available to us because we're not in the EU. What the UK has replaced that with is what's called the Turing scheme. So we know that traveling can be expensive, but the Turing scheme, what's amazing about this is it's effectively the replacement for Erasmus. But and what universities and schools have to do is bid for funding from the government to then provide their students with international organizations. What's fantastic about the Turing scheme, though, is that a heavy criterion, and whether you get funding from the government or not, is that the bids that you put to get that funding is focused specifically on disadvantaged students or disadvantaged groups. So there's never been a better time to win funding from the government to provide this to a group of people that deserve it and actually benefit from it the most. So that would be kind of my thoughts on how we can improve the education system. I don't think enough people from low-income backgrounds are gaining those experiences that oftentimes are life-changing. I can attest to that. That 1 year of traveling and all the skills I developed, emotional intelligence, cultural agility, adaptability, communication, confidence, all of those different skills translated directly into work. And let's be honest, my career hasn't, it started off well, let's say, and I do attribute that to a lot of my travels. So I'll pause there and pass over to the next panelist.
Thank you so much for such an energetic opening, Gary, and I'm very, very happy on that basis to turn to Chris.
Thank you, Horatio, and also thank you, Gary. So I guess looking at the question, how do we improve formal education system and drive greater social mobility? I think for me, there's two parts to this question. The first part being how do we improve formal education systems themselves, and also then in regards to how do we drive greater social mobility. How do we improve formal education system? We have to first look at, in my opinion, reimagine what education and what educational system should be and what it should look like in the first instance. The current system we find ourselves in the UK was one built on the idea of factory workers. The whole idea of the way that our desks are put, the students, etc. That's the foundation that we find ourselves on, and that's where we find ourselves. In order for us to then be looking at greater social mobility, we need to be looking at how do we change what education looks like. Even up to gradings. The reason why our grading system is the way that it is because in the factory, the idea of an A, which people would go for, is how they were tested in the factories. So they were to get an A on their product or their assembly line, and that would then translate. So it was brought into the classroom. I think then by us reimagining what educational system looks like in the first instance will allow us to drive for that greater social mobility. But also, I think a lot of it needs to be looked at in regards to the parents as well, the parents of students and their understanding and their thoughts on education as well. Quite a lot of students that I come across, being a secondary school teacher myself, a lot of their parents occasionally, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who had gone through the educational system in the UK, are often disengaged. They were disengaged throughout the educational system themselves for various reasons. We can look historically at the work of many scholars, and that in particular around the 1970s, where Black students, especially those from the West Indies, were put into basically special educational schools and were removed from the curriculum, removed from schooling in its entirety. We also look to today, and we see figures, we see stark figures of Black and BAME individuals removed from the classroom, excluded, expelled, etc., permanent exclusions. But what we neglect to look at is those who are excluded from the classroom, for example, taken out, removed by a member of SLT in the first instance, or who are sent home early, again, data which is not recorded. So I think this is one thing that we need to look at in actually improving formal education in itself. I think though, when in regards to that, we have to look at what do we mean? Do we mean education itself, or do we mean schooling? These are two different things. The schooling system definitely requires improvement, definitely needs change. But actually education itself, that of people educating themselves, be it through their own reading, through academia, that, in my opinion, is entirely different. And actually, what I would argue is, how do we improve formal schooling system? And with that being improved, then we can start looking at for greater social mobility. A lot of initiatives are in place at the moment, those helping disadvantaged backgrounds, those from underrepresented backgrounds as well. But again, some of this wording is, in my opinion, arguably not very helpful. The fact that you group you group individuals into things such as underrepresented, disadvantaged, already puts up a barrier for many students to not want to be involved, not want to engage in these initiatives, because they're known as the maybe pupil premium students, they're known as the free school meal students, they're known arguably as the poor kids. And that is how many of the students interpret it. A lot of these terms are political. They're political terms used, and they're in the political sphere, and they're written into blogs and newspapers. But actually, how do the students translate that onto their day-to-day? And what they see is that I'm given free stuff because my parents are poor. And because of that, I'm being told that I need to go to a university, or I need to go somewhere in order to basically not be like my parents. That is ultimately what we're telling the students time and time again within this current schooling system. Once that's changed, however, I do believe that greater social mobility will be possible, where students will be able to definitely go past that and improve on what maybe their parents had endured. But again, it needs to come from also in the household. I believe it needs to come in the household, where the parents can understand as well. I guess the final points, because I know there's a longer discussion to come, but is that of sorry. Yeah, I guess the final point is then that of what do we want that social mobility to look like? Where are we aspiring for individuals to get to? Is it solely that things are put in place for individuals to get to top tier universities, for them to be in Oxbridge, for example? Is that what we're then trying to churn out? Are we trying to churn out a generation of ethnic minorities, for example, that are only aspiring to this particular place, and then potentially an elitist culture is formed both within a white culture, but then also that of a BAME culture? Is that what that's the question I would ask? Is that what we're going for? Is that what we mean by social mobility? That individuals are to reach the boardroom, for example, that individuals are aspiring for these sort of roles, but then what about the others? So I guess I'll stop there, because I know there's a further discussion to come. But in regards to the question, that's my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, Chris. Such insightful suggestions. And on that basis, I'm very, very happy to turn to Andrew.
Hey, everybody. It is a pleasure to be part of it. Thanks for having us out. Horatio, for the very gracious introduction. Gary and Chris for some really good thoughts, much of which I agree with and understand where you're coming from. So I manage Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. SEO London is what most people know us as. And I would presume that a good chunk of folks on the call may actually have been part of our programming at some point. We've been a charity operating in the UK for 20 years. And in 20 years, we've seen the culture of this country change dramatically. Whereas nobody talked about diversity. Nobody had a diversity officer in their firm. They're just, the world we live in today is a completely different place. It feels like, from the terms of language used to engage these problems. Now, there's still a lot of problems to be dealt with. Let's be very, very clear. But I think we have some positive momentum and language and resource that is available. It's a question of what do we do with it now. At SEO London, our view is, and Chris, we do use the language of disadvantage. We use the language of underrepresentation, and we are in our lane, in our theory of change, and the way we work. We are certainly looking to engage people and take them to the top, to the boardroom, and so on. And it is a piece of a puzzle. And I think your question about what about everybody else, best question that could be asked. At the same time, it's a question of that's the broader agenda, right? And we're not, as an organization, we're not funded at that to do everything. We're able to work on bits of the pieces that we can control. But I think your sentiment is right on. I think it's helpful for me to reflect on Gary's response as well about being outwardly mobile. Whether it's an Erasmus or a touring scheme, it was called. Good to hear that that's happening. I think that's really powerful. Much of what we do at SEO London is designed specifically to create that sense of, if not outward, certainly upward mobility and an understanding that the world is a bigger place. I think the language of taking kids and sending them to China for 2 weeks or whatever it is a terrific idea. It'll be hard to imagine that every kid in the UK is going to get that opportunity. And so I think finding those opportunities to create the same effect locally as well is something that I'm a big supporter of. How we think about it. At SEO London, we work with, we're best known for our undergraduate work, but frankly, we work with secondary schoolers all across London and beyond. We have programs that we're over 50 secondary schools just in London alone that we're actively partnered with, and we're engaging secondary schoolers age 15 to 18, so a particular end of the spectrum. We try to find corporate resources and drive as much value as we can from them, big investment banks, corporate law firms, technology companies, et cetera. Gary, LinkedIn, for example, is one of the firms we would work with, and try and use their resources and direct them to young people to create that sense of outward mobility in their own lives, to be able to see beyond their immediate circumstance. And frankly, I look at ourselves as being in the hope business. I mean, Chris mentioned, what happens when, generations get essentially left behind or ignored. I grew up in Jamaica. I've got lots of family from that side of the family who came to England as part of the Windrush generation, and they haven't advanced for a lot of the reasons that Chris was talking about. That is to be able to break people out of the circumstance that they find themselves in is much of what we spend our time doing. So to address the question, how do you reform the education system? I liked how Chris broke it into two pieces. I think we have to decide what we're trying to educate people for. I think education can be a lot of things, and too much of the time, though, I think it's teaching to a test, just getting people through the system, crank them out, push them out, get good grades, get the funding, we're in business next year. I think with a more constructive, hopefully creative way forward is to think about education as a series of experiences that teachers can craft for young people to give them a vision of what's possible beyond their immediate frontier. That's sort of the breaking down of boundaries and the expanding of horizons. But that's not something that I think all of us on this call, I mean, Chris, you're in the schools. It's hard for us to impact on a societal scale. That's what elected governments are for. On the second part about how do we drive social mobility, I think certainly our work at SEO London within the remits of what we focus on is an example of one particular path for one particular set of kids. But I do see the answer ultimately as being developing more in the frame of connectivity to employers, because so much of mobility is having a job, paying your bills. And there's just the basic question of resources. I have friends who are head teachers, people who are in the school system, and they reflect a world that is constantly being crushed by budget challenges. And every year it's cut 5%, cut 15%, cut 20%. And what's going to go? Career services. It's going to be one of the first things to go. Social mobility, gone. Just spoke to my daughter's teachers today about citizenship. You know, there's it's getting cut. It's getting cut. So Horatio, back to you, and hopefully off to Precious. But that's our quick take. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Really, really insightful takes. And on that basis, very, very happy to hand over to Precious.
Hi, I feel like everyone has said pretty much everything that I was thinking. I think for me, I definitely agree with what Chris said about the difference between education and schooling. I think for just the development of education, there should be more of a focus on educating through strengths of individual students, because I think the way that education is set up within the parameters of schooling at the moment, as Chris said, is through sort of that testing mechanism, and it is sort of a conveyor belt of just you learn something, you try and regurgitate it in an exam, and then you get your grade, and hopefully you can move on to a good university and get a job. But I think there's a lot of enriching experiences that you lose in that format and in that context, and really sort of along the lines of what Gary was saying, of being able to immerse yourself in a culture that is completely different to yours, and being able to learn outside of the context of a classroom is so important for when you are, you know, moving within the world. I think a lot of the things that we learn after school is what helps us progress in our careers, whichever career that you end up choosing. A lot of those things that you learn is what helps you forward. And I think when you, especially for example in psychology, when you think about the learning difficulties that some children and teenagers, even adults, have to sort of work through when it comes to learning, a lot of that is left, you know, ignored, and that affects really how well someone can do in school, regardless of IQ levels or ability. The ability to be able to learn effectively is something that is overlooked a lot of the times, or just underfunded. You know, I have friends who work in SEN departments, and the funding for that is cut every year. And there's a lot of children and a lot of teenagers who are suffering as a result of that, who don't get the chance to learn effectively, and that really holds them back. So even with a lot of the suggestions that have been put around that within itself, pinpointing areas where we can help with just the ability to learn is really important, and that is a massive part of where you see a lot of children really falling behind in that area, and I think being able to have a fair opportunity of that is really important. I think most people who are in education, they want to do well, they want to try the best, and learn as much as they can and get from it as much as they can. So it's not specifically that, but it's the context in which they're doing it in, and how diversified that is, there isn't enough equity in that, and because not everyone learns the same. And if you are trying to use a sort of cookie cutter structure to teach children who learn differently, come from different backgrounds, it doesn't always work, and there will be people who fall behind. So I think really, really sort of looking at how we can improve schooling is vital, and also looking at the curriculum. There are some things that I think in the curriculum are very exclusive to certain groups of people, and aren't really needed when you look at the grand scheme of the workplace and how society's changed and what we need now. And some of that might be because of funding, and some of that might just be because of the outdated curriculum that we do have. But there does need to be a revision of the curriculum that we're learning, especially, as Angie said, with the idea of citizenship being cut. That's definitely one thing that should not be cut. And I've always said that I think things like social sciences, like sociology, subjects like philosophy, those subjects are so important when it comes to really helping somebody expand their thinking and giving them the tools to think critically and evaluate. And that is such an important aspect of learning. And I think if those things aren't concentrated on, especially for children who come from protected groups, and that's another term that you can use instead of disadvantaged groups, that is something that really does hinder success in education and therefore social mobility. So I do think there needs to be a diversification in education. There definitely needs to be a diversification in how we teach and what we take into consideration when we're trying to teach. And there needs to be a lot more equity in how we teach as well. Those would just be sort of my starting thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, Precious. And thank you to all of our speakers for their opening remarks. And so before we delve in a little bit more, and we've got a few questions that we're going to go on to ask, we're just going to take a very quick moment to engage all of you in an interactive activity that we have prepared for you in advance. So on the screen, what you are going to see is there is an interactive poll which I'm going to ask all of you to take part in right now. For all of those who are on the live link, you will be able to take part. For everyone who is streaming, there is going to be a little bit of a delay. So unfortunately, you probably won't be hearing what I'm saying now until a few minutes and therefore unable to participate. But for those who are on the direct link, I'm going to ask you to go onto a website called menti.com, and that includes all of our speakers as well. If you can go onto menti.com, you can go either via your phone or a new tab on your computer and enter the code 34036991, as you can see at the top of the screen. And we're simply going to ask you a few questions just to see where you stand in relation to some of the issues that we've already touched on. So to begin with, one of the very first questions that we've asked is, to what extent do you agree that, and we've highlighted a few pieces here. So statement number one, that the typical UK classroom prepares young people from all cultural backgrounds for the boardroom. Two, that the typical UK classroom empowers young people to be good citizens. And three, that to make a significant social progress, do you think that young people from disadvantaged backgrounds must be lucky? So a few responses so far. So far, there is some level of disagreement on the first and the third, with some level of neutrality on the second. We'll give it just a few more moments. Really interested in any further responses that we have. So this is, again, really, really interesting. So as it stands at this moment in time, if we are to answer these questions, to what extent do you agree with them. So as it relates to the boardroom, no one really is thinking that actually young people are getting the support that they need to access the boardroom. We'll go into that a little bit more in the conversation. On the question of citizenship, perhaps a little bit more support, but again, generally speaking, we still haven't got to that halfway mark. And finally, where we're speaking about social progress and being lucky, again, there is a suggestion that perhaps we disagree to some degree that we might need to be lucky. But let's, for now, move on to the next question. Thank you for your responses to question 1. So to question 2, and again, this was something that was touched on by Chris in his opening remarks. What is success when it comes to developing young people? What do we think success actually means? Is it an outcome, a place that they get to, a salary, a type of role? Is it a mentality or a mindset? What do you think success is? So the first suggestion here is that they have fair access to all opportunity. Okay, interesting. We can explore that a little bit further later on. What does fair actually mean? Can we really achieve fair access? Happy, fulfilled, resilient lives? Again, really, really interesting. So again, a kind of disposition there, maybe a judgment that can be made by the individual, or is that something centrally that we can think about? Do we know when a child is happy, when they are fulfilled, when they are resilient? Really, really interesting reflections though. And then next one, different opportunities. And maybe if we are to build out a little bit, maybe success is the opportunity for someone to be able to explore different ideas. Maybe, absolutely. Maybe that's interpreted slightly differently. We've got the suggestion that it's allowing them to reach a level of self-awareness of the reality of this world we live in, including the career prospects, business prospects, health, etc. Interesting. So whether we're speaking about resilience before or the health piece here, this is the second time that it's coming up. Definitely something as a concept that we would like to explore a little bit more in this conversation, but thank you very much there. And then finally, allowing them to make their own informed decisions. Okay, very, very interesting. So, oh, and there's another one that squeaked through. Develop their strengths and areas of improvement, allowing them to find ways to emotionally, socially, psychologically, and financially leverage these strengths. Very, very powerful reflections indeed. And again, to all who have been sending them across, thank you very much. We are asking our final question just before we then jump back into a little bit more of a panel discussion. And that final question is this: who is most responsible for providing support to young people from the most challenging backgrounds? Again, we had it earlier on in the conversation that maybe there is a role for parents. Chris spoke about disengaged parents. We heard from Andrew about the idea of using corporate resources. Is that something that we need to major on? Who is most responsible for providing support to young people? Maybe some people would say that that's shared. Maybe some people would say actually it's a flawed question. Again, interested in any reflections that you have. So the first suggestion is society. We all need to support young people. There is a common phrase that is used that says parents give birth to a child, a community raises it. Absolutely in line with that type of thinking. The second suggestion here, the government, their social support system, teachers and employers. I guess that really does build into this idea of helping to kind of make sure there's an infrastructure available for people to receive the support that they need. Really interesting. The student themselves. Now, this is really, really interesting. We'll explore that a little bit more. Whilst other people have spoken about the system and support structures, maybe the most important, and again, we're not saying the only thing, but the most important, according to this person, may actually be the student themselves. Another person suggesting the government, and then someone who says this is a trick question. There is no one group of people that is responsible. A holistic approach is always best. Yes, we've definitely got some very, very smart Alex in the comment section, but very, very welcome suggestion, and definitely really, really valuable. And finally, competent, caring leaders from across the community set the tone for young people to rise within that society. Again, really powerful reflections. So once more, to everyone who has sent in a comment so far, sorry, thank you so much for those comments. We are going to come back to the questions that you've posed, and it's really great to see that people are already engaging with questions. But for now, I just want to turn back to the panelists, and we've had such a rich, open conversation. We've spoken about citizenship, we've spoken about boardroom preparation, we've spoken about luck, we've spoken about responsibility and who drives what. And at this moment in time, I just want to, I'm going to start off with Precious to begin with. Precious, we've had a really, really interesting conversation around whether or not people are receiving the right kind of support in order to progress. You, in your reflection, spoke about the curriculum and about addressing learning needs. If success is about giving people opportunities, if success is about making sure that as many people as possible maybe are able to make progress, how are we able to kind of find the right level of resource to make sure that we're able to support every single child in the way that they might need that support? Is that a barrier which is too high for us to set? Or do you think that there is something we can do to meet the needs of every child?
It's definitely something that is a case by case basis. It's something that you would need like research in. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to give like a research plan of it all in one go, but I would say it's definitely something that should be given. A lot of that autonomy should be given to people who are there on the ground day in and day out. So looking at head teachers and teachers, looking at sort of local councils, and having them have the opportunity to look at the landscape of their borough or their town and their district and see where issues are arising. Look at how we can foster better SEN departments. Look at ways of engaging more diverse, a more diverse collection of teachers from different backgrounds. Just as much as we want to look at the inclusion of students, we also have to look at the inclusion of teachers, and that plays a big part in how well a lot of it's taught, and also how well we can reach students as well. There is a lot to be said about seeing yourself in the person that's teaching you, and sometimes you might feel like that's sort of like the sort of, I don't know, the key buzzword to say of representation, but it is important. I think giving that autonomy to on sort of like that smaller scale will be the best way to address the intricacies between the differences between different areas, because every school, every district, every town, borough has a different makeup of what it is that is causing issues in achievement and attainment, and there isn't a one size fits all that you can apply to that, especially when it comes to learning difficulties. Because even within learning difficulties, you get some people who have severe dyslexia and some people who have mild dyslexia. It's such a spectrum. So it really is just looking at it on a micro level, and then comparing that to see on how you can address that surface, sort of like on the surface with a macro approach, but really giving the autonomy to those people who are there day in and day out on a micro level, so they can address the issues that are there. And it will be time consuming, it will be expensive, but I think in the long run, it does have a really impactful effect on how well a lot of students can do, because it really is a significant hindrance in attainment, for sure.
Thank you so much, Precious. And on that basis, I take us over to Chris. So Precious tells us that teachers play a really important role in this. When we speak about micro level, it's really about the front line. It's you and your colleagues, the impacts that you make, the way that you're able to transform the learning experience. Having a diversity of teachers, a diversity of ideas is really going to help to get the best out of people and give us a wide variety of ways of exploring development. To that end, I want to ask you, to what extent do you agree with that assertion? But then moreover, I also want to think about something that you raised earlier when we're thinking about this idea of progress, which was Oxbridge. And many schools, many colleges increasingly see success as getting students to Oxbridge. We see fantastic examples of schools like Brampton Manor, who have been able to achieve great success in getting students from diverse cultural backgrounds into Oxbridge, obviously attaining really interesting life opportunities after that. Is that something that we should support and continue to see that as what success looks like in this space? Or do we have a challenge to that? I throw both of those to you.
Thank you, Horatio. I guess there's quite a lot to pick within that. Okay, so let's start off with Precious points, and I promise I will come on to the Oxford part or Oxbridge part. So in regards to teachers, COVID has been terrible. COVID has been very difficult. But what it has allowed is for the educational system and the schooling system to be looked at and scrutinized at this current moment in time. This is the second academic year where students have not sat in a hall, hundreds of piece taking exams, yet they've still been provided with grades in order to allow them to get on to future ventures. I think what that shows finally is that teachers are being listened to, their grading is being listened to, their input is actually being provided and taken into account. And this is allowing us to really start a conversation as to what does it look like moving forward. I think by doing so, it will allow more autonomy for the teacher. It will allow for greater impact for that teacher to have, because arguably the current system works like this, is that students sit with a teacher potentially for 5 years. The teacher can suggest that they think this student's outstanding, the student's not very good, etc. At the end of year 11, they sit in a hall and they either get an A star or an F, or in the current grading system, a 9 or a 1. And irrespective of what that teacher has basically said over the last 5 years means nothing, because external examination is then taken into account and taken all the credit. I also think what COVID has allowed is for teachers to become seen as more professionals. Now, there's been a lot in the media over the last 2 years about teachers, lazy teachers, not wanting to work, taking COVID as time off, etc. But actually, as I say time and time again, schools have not closed. Schools have remained open all throughout COVID. Now, whilst remote learning has been for the majority of students, schools have not closed. And again, this is showing the commitment of teachers throughout and the impact that it can have. Precious touched on to another point in regards to, I'm going to rephrase, more ethnic minority teachers to sum it up, and what impact would that have? If we look at this, if we look at the stats, we see that in leadership positions, so there, there's quite a lot of ethnic minority and BAME individuals lower down in the workforce. But when you get up to senior leadership, especially that of head teachers, it's about 90% white head teachers. And of that, I think it's 80% plus of white male head teachers. So initially there's an issue, and how do we address that? Do we need more BAME teachers? But the question is, how do we recruit more BAME teachers? Without education being seen as one of the go-to, and schools in particular as one of the go-to industries for ethnic minorities, we really need to, I know I've touched on the point already, start educating the parents as well in regards to this. Now, often, black in particular, we look at what jobs do they go into. it's engineering. You know, when you grow up, you need to be an engineer, you need to be a doctor, you know, or an accountant, you know, investment banker. But never is mentioned this idea of you need to be a teacher. And until we can shift that conversation, we're not going to get ethnic minorities into teaching. But if you look at the starting salaries, with the government trying to, in London in particular, the government trying to get to starting salaries of 30,000, I think the average UK grad salary is about 27 to 29,000. So at starting base, actually, if it's financial stability, arguably you would suggest that your child should go into teaching. But then what does progression look like moving forward, and how do you really get up with an educational system? And unfortunately, as you look upwards in regards to senior leadership, there are no ethnic minorities. Precious finally touched on this idea of diversifying the curriculum. Diversifying the curriculum, decolonizing the curriculum. You know, these are things that arguably do need to be looked into. But the question is, what do we actually want the curriculum to look like, and what is the purpose of the curriculum? That, in my opinion, is the fundamental question that we really need to be answering. What is the purpose of the curriculum? I myself, at the moment, I'm looking into decolonizing the curriculum, and that's what my research is on at the moment. But the most important part of this, it comes down to why. Now, decolonizing the curriculum in particular is often given the wrong idea, or that is the idea to remove. Decolonizing the curriculum is not to remove anything from the current curriculum, but rather to add another lens to what students are being taught, to add another lens into what their understanding is, and to how these historical events have taken place. It's not to suggest that we should remove individuals, and we see this in regards to recently we've seen plaques, we've seen statues, we've seen school names changing, etc. But actually, decolonizing the curriculum is more about leaving those where they are, but adding an additional layer, additional lens into a different perspective. And I think that's what's going to be important, because eradicating and removing is just merely erasing. And that helps nobody within a curriculum if you just remove, but rather to add additional input into it. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to touch on to Horatio, your final point in regards to Oxford and Oxbridge. I state, you know, for my position, I currently am doing my research at Oxford University, partly for the reasons that we speak of, partly for, you know, obviously my own social mobility, etc. But the argument is, you know, for myself, that's the system that I've gone through. That's the system we've gone through. That's what we've aspired to get to. That's what we've had to, because of the system looks like. But what I would question, controversially, hypocritically, some might argue, is that actually success? Is getting to Oxbridge success? And I think within the current system we find ourselves in, where we're churning out grades and we're churning out individuals in order to get to different places, where we know that many jobs, pretty much, if you haven't gone to Russell Group, sometimes your application might not make it past the next tier, etc. And whilst that is slowly changing, and they're looking more at the individual, historically it has been very straightforward. If you did not go to a Russell Group university and get a 2-1 or above, ... And arguably, if you went to Oxbridge, then you could have possibly got a 2-2, but the fact that you had Oxbridge on the CV was basically you bumping you up ever so slightly. So yes, we do. I think you know, personally, I do think we need more individuals at these institutions, definitely, because this is also where the decisions are made. This is where a lot of policy is written, and these individuals are where policy is taken into account. But at the same time, I think we do have to question, is that actually what success looks like? And can we start to change that narrative? Can we start to maneuver away from it having to be these particular places? Because back to my earlier point, then what about everybody else? So yeah, that's I guess all from me, and hopefully that answers your question.
It absolutely does, and thank you so much for the response there, Chris. And on that basis, I'm really happy to quiz Gary on some of the suggestions that we've had so far. So we've been told that because of COVID, people haven't actually been able to leave their front room, let alone go to international. And you've spoken to us about the importance of international exposure and how this maybe could help us pursue some aim about developing better and well-rounded citizens in a context where people are not getting the same kind of exposure potentially from actual travel. Do you think that the digital age has provided other opportunities for people to get international exposure? And if it has, how is it that we unlock those opportunities so that as many people as possible are thinking about the wider world, are engaging with what's happening in other spaces? Sorry, you're
Yeah,
mute.
sure. Harish, no, good question. It's actually, given the work that I do or I work on where we provide, work opportunities abroad, that's obviously not happening during COVID at all. So we are exploring and experimenting with virtual mobility, which it's kind of like a conflict in itself. But yes, providing students an international cultural experience via digital platforms. From our perspective, that is, it's an intervention during this time. It's not, a full replacement for a lived experience in another country, on the ground, in another place. But during this time, it's what we're looking at. Travel will, it will come back. We will get on planes. It might be different how we do it, but that will happen. And I think that emphasis on travel and education should still be there. It's such a shame that I think in kind of less privileged backgrounds, that's how I typically time it. I don't oftentimes like to use the word disadvantage, but people from less privileged backgrounds or from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, we see travel as a luxury. It's a nice thing to go abroad and to be in another country, but I really want to shift that mindset as it being very strategic. When we're looking at employment, and I'm sure Andrew will know this a lot, is that when you're interviewing, it isn't about the grade you necessarily have on your CV as opposed to all the soft skills that you can exhibit to an employer in that interview, right? Particularly at entry level, you might not have all the skills yet, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you can have them, and it's through extracurricular activities and extra international experience that you can start to develop those transferable, those intercultural skills that employers want to see. I want to go back to the Oxford thing in education, right? Because I do think a problem we have, particularly from less privileged backgrounds and BAME backgrounds, is that we put so much emphasis on education as it being the panacea to all of this world's kind of inequalities and issues, right? That we then don't put enough focus on other elements of development, such as extracurricular activities and international experiences. If you go to, I have a lot of privileged friends now, and their educational experience was just that. It was an experience. It wasn't just studying and testing. It was, okay, my education, but it was also the sports and the music that I was involved in. And it was also the traveling that I did as part of it was a holistic approach to education, because privileged people understand that education can extend the confinements of a classroom. It's a lot broader and deeper than that. But when you're from a less privileged background or from a, oftentimes which intersects with kind of race and ethnicity, we focus on education as almost specifically just being on reading your book, basically. And that mindset needs to shift. I don't want to put too much emphasis. We've spoken about parents. Parents, my mom is Nigerian, and education was everything. And that was because that was all she knew, right? It's only so much that we can put on the parents' shoulders when they don't have access to the knowledge that would then, open up or broaden their horizons around education. So just around the education piece, it's something that always, it gets me, because I'm quite contrarian on this piece. I don't think education solves all our problems at all. In fact, in this country, a working class graduate with a first class degree is still less likely to enter an elite occupation than a privileged graduate with a 2-2. Oxbridge graduates from Oxbridge, less privileged Oxbridge graduates, earn £5,000 less than privileged Oxbridge graduates in the same set of jobs. So there's something in the conversation of inequality that education doesn't solve for, but yet we're only really focusing on and getting that degree and getting that certificate. It's all the other elements as part of education, of it being an experience that can start to, I think, really bolster social mobility. So going around this in quite different ways, but just to pick up on some things that have been spoken about, I think education is too focused on, and just some of those questions that you put on the Menti form around, should we get people to the boardroom? And I struggle to answer those questions. I don't think that should be the end goal of getting people to the boardroom. I think there's so many other ways to measure success. But in the context of traveling and so forth, yes, virtual mobility is a replacement for now. This time will pass. We'll get on planes and we'll get on trains. And when that does, I really want to be a part of this movement, if you like, of getting more people to participate in these experiences, because they can be life-changing, and they oftentimes cultivate the skills that employers want to see to determine whether you're a quality or, I don't know, the right talent and fit for us.
Really, really interesting. Thank you so much. And on that basis, I now turn to Andrew. So, Andrew, people seem to be calling for you over and over and over again with some of the suggestions that we're having around thinking about development and what well-rounded development looks like. And obviously, in the space that you're in, you have a real opportunity to think about how people are able to progress, the kinds of skills, the kinds of ways in which they can develop outside of the classroom to become well-rounded individual, and conscious of what Gary's just told us, that actually it isn't just about the career that they go into. We absolutely understand that, but there's still something about being able to develop a wide variety of skills that set you up for life. And surely through the program at SEO London, you have a kind of opportunity to see people on a regular basis developing a good set of skills. And this is in line with one of the questions that we had from the audience, which is, in 2019, Ofsted has increased emphasis on the importance of personal development of students in schools through a new grading system. What types of mechanisms would help to accelerate personal development? I throw this to you, Andrew.
Okay, well, that second question here, let's see, what type of mix? I have two kids in the state secondary school system, and the notion that one sets the potential attainment levels or the target levels of a kid after year 6, and you're a 4 or a 5 or a 7 or a 8 minus or something like that, and then you drop into the school, and then the teachers are now marking you against this sort of predetermined sense of where you were when you were 10 or 11 years old. I've never seen anything quite like it academically. I think it comes from a good place, and it's trying to, I think this notion of personal development, looking at it in my own children's experience, it's, I like the notion, but it's got problems, because what if you're suddenly telling a student that, yeah, well, we thought you were worth a 4, kid. And it's nice to say you're exceeding expectations or you're advancing beyond that. But to have a secure grade in a 4, which is, I don't know what that is in the letter system, but it's not particularly aggressive, I think it creates problems unless it's implemented well with teachers who are invested in that process. I think that's really, it can create new problems. How does it translate outside of the system? How do you talk about it outside of the system? I mean, is that, how impactful does year 6, suddenly mean, how does it mark the rest of your academic career if you got a 4s and 5s, and others are getting 7s and 8s? So anyway, I think it's an implementation and execution question. I think it's an interesting way of measuring a student's personal development. But I can offer a related answer. I mean, you raised the point, Horatio, of SEO and our programming. In the work we do with the 15 to 18-year-old set, we do think holistically. And we do think that working outside of the school environment it can be a very positive thing. We can't reach every student, but the manner in which we seek to engage young people centers on, for our work, pre-professional development, but the holistic set of skills that drive that, which can ultimately translate to social mobility. So we will take, a cohort of 50 kids, put them all on a bus, and take them to universities of Oxford and Cambridge, had that discussion, but also Southampton and Birmingham, other, Russell Group universities, high achieving. We will also take those same 50 kids off to apprenticeship opportunities and say, listen, there's lots of ways forward here, guys. You don't have to only go one path. And the theory behind that is we want to give them all the information they need to make their own choices. This is a bit to Precious's point on another, even a more micro level. It's a level of the individual student, making their own choices fully informed, and allowing alternate futures to compete for themselves in an environment of as close to perfect information as we can create. We also, in the same programming, will give these young people work experiences. So when I talk about capturing the resources that corporates provide and delivering them to young people, the kids who come onto our programs, that same 50 that we put on the bus to different areas, we're going to give them insight days at a bank. Maybe it's a Goldman Sachs. We'll take them on an insight day to a tech company. Maybe it's LinkedIn, Gary. We'll take them on an insight day to AMV BBDO, an ad agency. And then we may do something. And so again, this is about holistic development, but aiming high, always, always aiming high. We also engage the students in hard skills training and soft skills training. So to discussion earlier about emotional intelligence, it's a part of our curriculum. But also notions about, what is a spreadsheet? How do you set a goal? How do you lay out, how do you build a network? What is a network for? These are all things we engage, and we have touch points with the students during half terms when a lot of their friends are just sitting at home or not doing much else. SEO kids are coming into extracurricular sessions where we're trying to give them the view of what their lives can be with as much information and love, frankly, as we can give them. Because this is not just a recruitment tool. We're trying to build lives. They're too young for the recruiters to care, frankly, right? So we're really thinking about how can we get them up and into higher echelons. I mean, the point was made about Oxbridge as a destination. One of the things about SEO's philosophy is that we take the world as it is, and we understand that the world is fundamentally unfair and flawed. And there's something we can do about that, and there's some things we can't do about it. And so within the framework that we're given, we want to raise up as many young people to play on that uneven playing field and have a chance at winning. That's kind of our philosophy in a way, right? So when you read that 50% of all judges or 50% of all TV correspondents or 50% of all partners at XYZ law firm are Oxbridge. Well, in our world, in this very deeply unfair world that we perceive, I'm going to try to get some kids into Oxford, let me tell you. We just got off the phone with Oxford yesterday, the development department, talking about their priorities. And they're very focused on driving results among the driving attendance, particularly from the Black community, into the university. Not just at the undergrad level, but Chris, at the grad level, they're really pushing this and trying to get resources for it. What am I going to do? I see that that's an opportunity in an unfair world. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to bring it. I'm going to deliver it to my community. That's how we think about the world. So to get that, because you can't just walk in. Like, Chris, you're probably pretty good to get in there, right? You've got skills. You need to provide young people with the skills and the belief and the knowledge, and that's our business. And you do that in a holistic manner, you have a chance at success. It's addressed at the level of the individual, as Precious was hinting at.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And on that basis, we're very quickly going to show you all the final question that we're going to be referring to at the moment. So we have another question that has come in, and the question simply states, a report from Education for Employers stated that 14% of state schools have a budget for guest speakers. Do you think that there should be more investment in guest speakers for various enriching topics? Now, I'm going to ask that the speakers incorporate that question into their final remarks. We're going to go around all of the speakers one final time just to get a final take from them in terms of, from the conversation as a whole, as we've had it, what do you think are the final things that we should be taking away at this time? What is the final answer that we can come to in terms of thinking about what we can do to improve formal education systems and genuinely achieve social mobility? And again, like I said, as you're answering that question, we will reflect on the question as it stands on the screen as well. And we're going to start off with Precious. We'll then go on to Gary, then Chris, and then Andrew to close us off. So Precious, if we'd like to start with you, please.
Yeah, so I would say yes. There should be investment in guest speakers. I think there's such a there's so much opportunity in having someone come in and speak their experience. I think the reality is that when you're looking at things like TED Talks, I feel like I'm confident in saying that probably not many 11 to 16-year-olds are spending a lot of the times watching TED Talks, and I think having someone come into school and come into your school and speak and talk about not only politics or or climate change, but other things as well, things to talk about emotional intelligence, things to talk about depression and anxiety and stress, things about getting how to progress in your career and how to really be mindful of what it is that you're in the school system for. I think school isn't just education. As Gary said, it's also a crash course in society and how life is going to treat you. As Andrew said before, life is not fair, and you learn that pretty quickly in school. And I think having outside influences and having opinions and experiences from other people who have lived a different life, had a different experience, and having that from a very early stage in your life is really vital to help you start thinking critically. I think the earlier in a child's life that we can encourage critical thinking and evaluation is the most important thing. It's the foundation in how you learn, how you appraise the world. It's the foundation of how you interact with people. It really encompasses your entire life. So having that having that mental muscle being practiced and being exercised from as early as possible is a fantastic thing. And I also think that there should be an opportunity for teachers to be guest speakers too. I don't think it should always be someone from the outside. I know for a fact I had a sociology teacher who was very, very impactful in my life and changed the way that I viewed basically almost everything. And I think having teachers are so vital. So having them be able to have a TED Talk of somehow being able to really speak and talk to students they already have a fantastic relationship with, they already know, is really impactful. And you can see there's already a discrepancy in some schools that tend to have a lot of guest speakers of high profile levels and other schools that don't. I know the secondary school that I went to recently had Boris Johnson visit, and I know that a lot of the ex-students were not happy because we know that if we were there, we probably wouldn't receive Boris Johnson very well. It's just a sign of how things have changed, but it goes to show that having that is really important, and having a sort of conveyor belt of knowledge coming through from different facets is also important too. So I think that would be a fantastic way of adding an extra layer of education, an extra layer of experience, an extra layer of thought provoking for students and for young people, and allowing them to know there's opportunities out there that they may have not known about. And there's probably students out there who don't know about SEO, and they could really take advantage of that, but they don't know it's there. So having that awareness spread more is definitely something that would be vital. If you don't know, you can't do. So I would definitely say I agree with that statement.
Thank you so much, Precious. And on that basis, we're very, very happy to move over to Gary.
Sure. So there's a charity called Future First, which some of you may know of. And Future First is a social mobility charity that helps state schools build out alumni networks. So they effectively get past students who have gone on to do whatever and invite them back to their state schools to give career talks or broaden horizons and so forth. I am a big fan of Future First, and I would love to see more of that. I'm sure a lot of the alumni of SEO London, I am an SEO alumnus, fun facts, Andrew. Yes, a lot of the SEO alumni, I'm sure, attended state schools or probably did. who are now in really cool careers. These are the types of students that Future First, they should be engaging with Future First, right? Using those experiences, going back to the schools or schools that are similar to them to talk about their experiences. So I think there's a degree of familiarity which will help a younger student listen and connect with the guest speaker. If someone is 30, 40 years older than me and has a completely different background, it might not resonate. But if there is X person who went to school down my road or my school and is now in X career, and is telling me if I do these three things, I can emulate or do something similar or whatever, that might land. So I really am a champion of Future First, and I would implore everyone to check them out. As you mentioned at the beginning of this, Horatio, Climbing the Rungs is my social mobility podcast. I speak with less privileged professionals across industries and how they've kind of done success in their lives and how they suggest other less privileged people do the same. I actually have quite a few SEO alumni on the podcast as well, so check it out. I'm actually doing, or the next episode to come out is in partnership with Future First. So you should check that out and you can understand more about what they do and how they work with people to bolster social mobility through effective role modeling and alumni networks. So, if I was to direct finances or investment in any place, it would be getting schools to sign up and work with Future First. I think it's such a powerful social capital intervention, which, let's be honest, guys, we can talk about education all we want, but really when it comes to careers, a lot of getting ahead is, it's what it's who not necessarily what Your network is your net worth, and Future First does that. Just to kind of tie up and answer the question of how do we improve formal education and drive greater social mobility, I think this conversation has highlighted the complexities of that question, right? I'm coming at it from an angle of international experiences out with mobility. Andrew's talking about careers development, soft skills development. We have Chris speaking about the schooling. What is schooling? Understanding that more, and then Precious really digging deeper into kind of, I feel like, personification. Not everyone learns in the same way. There's so many things that go into the education kind of conversation that there is no one silver bullet. And I think this conversation obviously highlights the complexities of that, and it's then making a decision of what's going to be most impactful at scale. I think to start off the conversation, I'm obviously completely biased for what I see, but I see merit in what everyone is saying here today. And I'm just hopeful that these conversations, people that are listening or do listen, are inspired to, get involved in the conversation and push that envelope forward. Because, I take a fairly grim perspective on what happens if we don't level up the playing field. I think if we look at what happened in France, the Gilets Jaunes movements, the US Capitol riots, how parts of the UK North reacted to impose lockdowns from Whitehall, is a demonstration that there is fertile ground for populist backlash against elitism around the globe. And if that happens, the consequences will be dire. So leveling up is actually in strategic importance for us, for the kind of social cohesion and keeping the social fabric of our country together. It's for too long been kind of not being given enough attention and focus. And I just hope that for conversations like this, for the work that everybody does on this call, we can continue to push the envelope and make consequential change. We need it.
Thank you so much, Gary. And on that basis, very, very happy to hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Horatio. Thank you, Precious, and thank you, Gary. So just a few things, I guess I'll touch on as I wrap up. First thing, the question of, to summarize the question, I believe is, should we have more guest speakers and should we invest more money into them? I guess the correct answer to this question would be yes. That's the answer that I'm probably supposed to say. That's the answer that everyone wants to hear. My answer to that is not really, in all honesty. And the reason why I say that is not that I don't think guest speakers are important, but the question is that what happens after that person leaves? Guest speaker comes in, they deliver an amazing speech and it riles up all the children, everyone's excited, and then they go. And then what? And that's the problem that we see time and time again. Now, what we do need is more guest speakers who provide them maybe extra support afterwards, provide maybe the infrastructure that's there for that to continue thereafter. Because then the students not only have a 1 hour session, arguably what it is, or a 2 hour session, but actually there's a continuation and there's that development of a relationship being built that students are able to continue with. Also, the question then, what do the teachers do with this information? For many teachers, they've only ever taught. So they're not aware of the world of such outside of education, outside of teaching. So you have this incredible investment banker come in and tell this amazing story, and I started X and I made it to the top. But the teacher's got no understanding or interaction with that story in order to allow the students to continue. I remember I used to work in Canary Wharf a few years back, and in short, I was never told that pretty much every single male in Canary Wharf wears a white shirt. I was not told this. So suit is either blue, grey, or black, and everyone wears a white shirt. And I wasn't told this. And I remember pretty much my first days, I wore this beautiful, I thought, pink, colourful, stripy shirt. And I realised that no one had told me that you need to wear a white shirt. And I had to run down to TM Lewin and at Canary Wharf and TM Lewin, they iron the shirt for you so you can put it straight on and go to the office. But these are the things. I had an amazing speaker come years before, and I aspired to get to these places, but actually it was these nuances, these tiny things that you also need to learn, these follow-ups that no one could have taught me, unless that speaker, for example, there's a mentorship or there's a coaching aspect in place to allow me to continue and develop that relationship. So do I think that there needs to be more guest speakers? Arguably, to some extent, yes, but there needs to be a continuation. What does it look like after that person leaves? A second point I quickly want to touch on is the earlier question in regards to Ofsted and personal development. Potentially controversial, but I think with Ofsted, what's needed is to reimagine what the purpose of Ofsted is. Far too often, Ofsted come in, they give a grade of good or outstanding, and all of a sudden, that's perfect, that school's fine, there's no issues, and schools go about. But actually, how does that really help develop the school? How does it help develop education as a whole? Many parents will look at a school, see that it either requires improvements or basically inadequate, and not send their children there. And actually, what we need to do is allow for there to be this continuation of development and support throughout the time, so that parents can actually understand. Andrew made a good point in regards to the grading system and his children and at SATs, this grade is given and students are then to basically be judged against this. There's much research, and I think it's the board 2018. If you type in the board 2020 et al. 2018, and basically it says that the teacher's expectations of a student very often has a direct impact on how that student will achieve overall. Now, what does that basically mean? If I see, or if a teacher sees that the grade of a student aspires to be a 3 because of their SATs results, because of how they've done on one test at the end of year 6, that is what that student potentially is going to live with for the next 5 years. And if they're expected to get a 3 and they're on a 4, when everyone's happy, they're making progress. They're making above expectation progress. Not taking into consideration that student could get a 7, an 8, or a 9, but actually a 4 is above expectation. And everyone wants to hear that. If I get told in my day job that I'm working above expectations, well, that's a good thing. Let alone not thinking actually how could we really stretch that forward. Final-ish points that I want to make is in regards to then parent engagement and how do we really engage the parents in what they're doing within education within the schools. Far too often, a parent is given a report card once a term, maybe once a half term, and on the basis that their child is doing well, that is pretty much the end of the conversation. Your daughter is doing well, the parent's happy, and that's it. But actually, how are we holding teachers to account? How are we actually asking, what are you providing for my son or my daughter? What extra is being done? What does differentiation look like in your classroom? It's not so much that my child is doing well, but how can my child be doing better? How can we extend that further to ensure that actually we're doing the best possible? And then again, it comes to this holistic point. It's more than just grades. It's more than just grades that we need to be taken into consideration. So my daughter's on a level 9. That's brilliant. But actually, is she happy within education? Is she going to be a lifelong learner, or is she going to do really well in this assessment, move on to the next thing, and then that's her idea of education finished? Because actually, education, in my opinion, should be for life. Schooling, yes. Schooling should be temporary. Schooling should be from reception, early years, EYFS, all the way up to arguably end of year 11, sixth form, postgrad, doctorate, if you want to. But actually, education is what we should be ensuring that we have lifelong learners. So what do we do? There's a lot that needs to be done, arguably, if you've listened to what I've had to say over the last sort of hour and a bit. But in short, what in my opinion, what to improve the educational system, first of all, we really need to start by thinking about what is the purpose of education, what is the purpose of the curriculum, and by doing that in the first instance, we're gone are the days of factory of trying to churn out factory workers. Gone are the days, we're collaborating. COVID has shown us this idea of working virtually. How is that being replicated within the classroom? How are we collaborating within the classroom? If a student talks whilst the teacher's talking, for example, all of a sudden there's behavior issues. They need to leave the classroom or something of that sort. But actually, in a meeting, people do speak at the same time, in small groups, in small pockets. But group work is often frowned upon within education, depending on the subject. So I think we need to re-envision what is the purpose of education, what's the purpose of the curriculum, and then by doing so, I think we'll have better, more well-rounded and a holistic approach taken. And I think social mobility will shine through once that is the case, because pupils, parents will feel empowered in order to make a difference moving forward. And that is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And on that basis, it's my real pleasure to hand over to Andrew for our final remarks.
Okay, well, thank you again. Great thoughts, everybody. And I'll close, I think, relatively quickly on the question about guest speakers. Sure. I think it sounds like a great idea. Why not? I mean, the ultimate question, that I think Chris sort of nailed quite well is, what happens afterwards? And so it becomes a question of the efficacy of that speaker. And, if someone's going to come in and charge £60,000 to give an hour and then disappear, there's also a question about use of funds relative to other opportunities when some schools can barely, fill the fill the paper trays for kids to, scratch out, pictures or whatever. I mean, what do we want from our education system that's going to make it better? I mean, I think it is, what do I want from my kids? Well, can we build? Is it possible to build an education system that would satisfy me? I'm a pretty demanding guy, but like your parents, Horatio, a little bit of a tiger dad. I want my kids to crush it. I want my kids to win, but most of all, I want my kids to be happy, and I want them to be a little bit. Life is tough. Life is long. Maybe not long enough, but it's. I want them to be a little future-proof too. What do we all do as parents? We want our kids to do better than us. We want them to have, when they're out of your hands and in the care of a teacher or a school, you hope, or I hope, that they're getting some visibility into the world around them. So they go to their chemistry class and they pour one into thing and something explodes. They understand the way the world works. 1 + 1 is 2. What's that quick maths rap that came out a couple of years ago? You want visibility into the world around them, so that, and also a palpable sense of curiosity, to give them visibility into the future. Like, what could the future be? But to be excited about that. I want my kids to be excited. I want my kids to be curious. I want them to be, eager to, the phrase of lifelong learning. I want them to keep doing that. So I think if a school does all those things, I think you do get good social mobility outcomes, because students will fall into patterns of behavior that are suitable for them, and will give them a sense of resilience, give them a sense of hopefully a bit of ambition. Not necessarily ambition to rule the world, but ambition to be the best they can be, or whatever the hell that is. And so, I know it does come back. I think we've touched on a lot of really good points here. What is the purpose of learning? I think to me, it's this. You can go back to Plato and Aristotle and what is the good life? I mean, it's pretty basic at the end of the day. And so, yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add than I want my kids to be curious, excited, have some intellectual depth, have some resilience. And if we sort that out, social mobility is going to come. We'll sort them out.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I really, really appreciate that sentiment. We will sort them out. I hope we do. But curiosity is definitely a good place to be. And so on that basis, I can only say a really big thank you to all of our guest speakers today who have really put forward a really fascinating conversation, which we'll round up in a moment. And before we do, massive shout out to SEO London, who obviously have not only been incredible contributors to this conversation, but we've seen so much of a reflection of how your alumni and the efforts that you have made are really becoming incredible people who are making such an impact. So a really big well done to you and the team, Andrew, and a really big shout out to Climbing the Rungs. Thank you so much for being here, Gary. And we really hope that for all of the links that you've been sending out, people do follow up, check out the podcast, and engage with all those like Future First that you've raised today. Thank you again to Chris, and particularly the recognition, as you've highlighted, that you are also a governor as well as a teacher. And actually, for many people who are not currently a school governor, that really is an accessible way of being able to be in education with, I don't want to say limited effort, with it is obviously a commitment, but with a limited commitment, you can make a very, very big difference. And we encourage anyone who is listening to this at any point to do that. And Precious, you are amazing. You have kept us grounded, and we really, really appreciate you. Go YDWC. So on that basis, what is it that we've heard today? We've heard from Gary the importance of international exposure, the importance of developing people in a well-rounded way that allows them to become global citizens and to understand the power of alumni networks and how that translates into better opportunities for people in the long term. We've heard from Chris about the opportunity to make sure that we engage parents, the understanding that this isn't just about education, but is about schooling. The idea that labels can be problematic and we need to be able to move beyond them. We have to understand that success goes beyond Oxbridge and there are so many factors, and we have to be ready to question and ready to think beyond what we think is simple. We've heard from Andrew about the idea of being able to call upon corporate resources, the fact that really he says that he's in the hope business. And when we think about the world as it is, it's really important that we do connect people to jobs, but then that we also think about how it is that we think about education not just as a series of tests, but a series of experiences which are going to help people to move forward. And finally, from Precious, we heard about the idea of being able to educate people through their strengths, the ability to think about how it is that we can help people to learn most effectively, to understand the unique needs of each person who is learning, to think about the teachers and the role that they play, to think also about the curriculum and how it is that we can inspire people to be more. I'm sure that today we're not going to have the answer to everything definitively. And so to answer the question, how do we improve formal education systems and achieve social mobility? I think the ultimate answer just for now is step at a time. And this has been a great step with all of you here today. Thank you again for your time and attention. For those who are interested, please check out ydwc.org. Come to future events, become a member. We'd love to engage with you again in future. But for now, to everyone, have a really, really, really great evening and take care. Bye.
Thanks all. Have a great rest of the night.
Thanks, guys.